This video is in partnership with Lens Rentals. If you would like to try out some new camera gear before you decide to buy, follow the link in the description, use the code Liam15 for 15% off your order. And if you do use that link, you will help to feed this little pit bull that I adopted a couple months ago, and he is very hungry. The Sony A7C is Sony's entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera. I think. They release a lot of different cameras. This is the first Sony camera that I've ever held. What drew me to this was the compact design. They removed the bump that is up here and put the viewfinder over here. So it has this little rangefinder-esque styling that I think makes it look smaller, more subtle, and it doesn't cover half your face while you're shooting, and I quite like that. You should note that this is a review from my own experiences of using this camera. I'm not the most technical of reviewers, and you can definitely find much more technically focused reviews. I will, however, add in some pictures that I took with this camera as I'm talking about it to break it up a bit and give you some nice Sony pictures to look at. I'm going to start with the LCD screen. For many people, this is an important feature, that you have this flip out type screen. People who are vlogging like this so that they can see themselves while they're shooting. Sony have actually, this is quite a smart design thing, and they put the microphone jack up high so it won't get in the way of your screen. That being said, if you are using anything else, like this little slot down here, it does obstruct the screen a little bit and you won't be able to turn it. And that's great from a video standpoint, but from a photography standpoint, I much prefer the older, just like the simple flip up screens like that. I use this flip out screen on the Canon R6 for this type of video, and that's really the only time that I prefer it. I don't think that many people are walking around vlogging with full frame cameras anymore. I think most people are doing it with compact cameras. However, I don't think Sony should change it. As long as the market is calling for this kind of screen, it's probably a smart decision to include it. While I'm on the subject of the screen, it does have a touch screen, but it doesn't work for the menus. It's good, it's okay for focusing, but I find it really laggy. I much prefer Canon's touchscreen functions. You can drag the focus point around the screen, you could do it while you're looking through the viewfinder even, and I just don't find it works intuitively. It sort of sticks at some point and you have to take your finger off and start again, and it just doesn't move naturally how I would want it to move. The next thing is the EVF. I like that it's placed here. I tend to like cameras where the EVF is over here. I find it the most comfortable, and I like being able to kind of easily see the rest of the world with my other eye. And if nothing else, I just like the design. I think it looks a little bit less like you're using a professional camera. For street and travel, I just like it. The downside is that they have made the viewfinder tiny. It's almost certainly smaller than the other A7 cameras that have it up here, and they've kept it small so that they can maintain the size of the screen and not have the camera be any bigger. So it's a bit of a compromise that you just have to kind of deal with, and it's certainly not unusable. I just don't think it's very good. I feel like I've used other cameras such as Fujifilm X100V. Might not have the biggest viewfinder, but it feels nicer than this, and maybe that's something also to do with the eye cup. I feel like I'm going to poke myself in the eye with this because it's so small. There's nothing that really I can rest the top of my eye on while I'm looking through there. This is also going to be a problem for anybody with glasses. It's so small, it's going to make it difficult to see in there. I'll start by saying that this is the smallest and most capable full-frame camera that I've ever used. The Sony A7C weighs a touch over 500 grams without a lens on it, so it is very small and light, especially for a full-frame camera. It's not necessarily noticeably lighter than its bigger brother, the A7 III, but when you are traveling, maybe you won't notice it that much, but maybe over time, you would just prefer to be carrying the lighter camera. And there's something about the shape of it that actually makes it feel odd to me to think that this is a full frame camera. It doesn't seem any bigger than most of the Fuji cameras I've ever used. However, on closer inspection, it does seem thicker. I think the body itself is quite thick. And even when you compare it to something like this Leica M262, it's a little bit shorter, and when you look top down, it's about the same thickness. The The body itself is actually a little bit thicker than the M262, but the screen that pokes out the bottom of the 262 and the EVF make it pretty much the same. The only thing that makes this feel fatter than the 262 is the grip here. But it is also a little bit shorter lengthwise than the M262. So overall it does seem a little bit smaller, but the weight is about the same. The M is maybe a little bit heavier. The downside is even when you put these small lenses on the Sony, they tend to be bigger than these tiny little Voigtlander lenses that you can get for the M. So I think what you've gained with the body, you end up losing with the lenses that you put on here because the Leica lenses are so small. That being said, this can do a lot more than this, and this is a very particular product. I don't have a Sony A7 III to put side by side, but when you put them side by side, the body is pretty much the same. It just is lacking the little bump here. It's not significantly smaller than the A7 III. Another downside of it being such a small compact body is that a lot of people are going to have problems finding a place to put their little finger. I've got pretty small hands and I can fit my hands on there fairly comfortably, but a lot of people are going to be holding it kind of like this, with this finger floating around the bottom, and that's going to annoy people. But again, when you're looking for compact cameras, these are just sometimes things that you have to give up. And then another thing about this being sort of marketed as something that's good for vloggers, I don't know that it would make sense having a full frame compact camera that's being marketed to vloggers as an easy to carry around thing. When you factor in many of the lenses that people might want, especially if they want the sort of highest quality shallow depth of field lenses, are going to be really big on the front of this camera, and that's going to kind of negate the point of having a compact camera. However, if you're willing to have that less shallow depth of field and these smaller lenses like this, maybe it won't be so bad, but then you will sort of forfeit that full frame shallow depth of field thing that a lot of people like to get in their vlogging videos. Now, I already touched on the ergonomics when I was talking about the grip and the problems people might have with it. While I think the ergonomics aren't too bad at all, I actually would prefer it not to have this big grip. It makes it easier to hold on to generally, but when it's a compact camera, I want it to be smaller and more compact. So I'm actually more used to cameras like the X100V or the Leica M262 that has no grip here at all. I like how this feels. I carry it around all day without any problems, and it's comfortable to me. And I think it keeps the camera looking more compact and feeling maybe a little bit less chunky in your hand. Now, they did remove the joystick on the A7C that they had on the A7 III, and I think that was maybe not a great idea. I would have preferred if they removed this D-pad thing, because you can change your focus point with the joystick much easier than with the D-pad. It just requires a bit more effort to get your thumb down there. And they also did not have the front scroll wheel here. So I think if they left that front scroll command dial on and the back command dial, they could have gotten rid of this one and we would still have had that same function. And another point is, when I first started up this camera, this was the shutter speed and this did the aperture, and I would normally say that this would have been the aperture and this would have been the shutter speed. That would make more sense to me, but maybe Sony's are just like that and people are used to it. So the first thing that I did was switch those around. And because there's one less command dial, the ISO is mapped to this D-pad button here, which isn't too bad to use. I just think overall, to me, it's not the best ergonomic design, but I am used to Canon or Fuji, so maybe I'm just used to different ergonomics. They also got rid of some of the custom function buttons that they had on the A7 III, and that was probably necessary in order to make the camera more smaller and entry level. They had to obviously remove something. That will annoy some people, and maybe it would annoy me over time if I was using the camera a lot. However, I do like that they had added this dedicated recording button on the top, so at any point you can just press it and it will start recording video, even if you're in some other photo mode. The next thing is the battery. They do have the same battery that they have in many Sony cameras. It's this Z battery. So there is very good battery life on it that's similar to what you can expect from the rest of the A7 Sony cameras. And I think keeping that battery, while a good choice for mini, is one of the reasons why they couldn't make this all that much smaller than the A7 III. The sun came out and I think it might be overexposing my face. Another big downside for many professional photographers is that there is only one card slot. Again, they're making it an entry-level full-frame camera, so they need to remove something, and taking out a card slot is something that will deter a lot of professionals. But if you're just getting started into full frame, this might not be something that you're too worried about yet. The A7C also has the 5-axis in-body image stabilization. Everybody loves to have that nowadays. It may not be the best on the market, but they have managed to cram it into this little camera body, so that's pretty damn good. It's almost certainly not going to be the best if you're walking around vlogging and expecting it to be super smooth. However, if you're just stopping and taking some clips that are handheld, then I think it'll do just fine. It has the same 24 megapixel sensor that it has in the A7 III with that 14 stops of dynamic range, but apparently it has the same color science as the A7R IV. Either way, I think it renders colors really nicely, the pictures look sharp, and it does indeed have plenty of dynamic range if you need to pull those shadows back. I will say that straight out of the box, the colors might have been a little bit on the magenta side, especially on a snowy day, but within the white balance correction menu, I warmed it up a little bit and moved it a little to the green, and since then pretty much colors are looking good straight out of camera. The autofocus is good. It can apparently autofocus up to -4 EV fast. It has really good tracking. I don't really have any complaints about the autofocus. Sony has been known to have great autofocus, and I can confirm it has great autofocus. What I didn't like about it was nothing to do with the autofocus itself, but it was the interface to use the autofocus. I thought the touch function was kind of laggy and slow, and I did not like moving the focus point around the screen with this D-pad. I would have much rather have the joystick up here. One thing that's quite nice is that you can have a single point autofocus mapped to your shutter button, and you can use this AF on at the back to sort of start tracking. So if you put your single point over something and then start the tracking, it will then track it throughout your screen, or you can just take shots as normal. However, I still prefer the autofocus on the Canon EOS R6, and it may be just that I don't know how to get the right setting within this camera's menu system. I also somehow keep moving the focus point accidentally into this bottom corner. Probably not the camera's fault, that's probably more my fault, but it's a gripe that I have. Okay, overheating. Sony cameras had issues with overheating for a while, and I believe the Sony A7 III was no different. It had a 30-minute recording limit, and that problem seems to have been solved in the A7C. It does not have a 30-minute recording limit. I did not personally test it, but in other videos that I've watched, it doesn't seem like it's overheating at all, and will just keep recording video without any problems. And that is a big plus, especially if you are professional and you need a B cam. And this is something that is really useful because you don't want a recording limit. You just want to set it up in the corner and record the thing, and then you can do what you want with your other camera. I think that is a big plus on this camera, and something that would make it a viable camera to actually buy for professional use. But there's still the worry of that single card slot, so maybe it wouldn't. Something that shocked me about the Sony A7C was the amount of time it takes to start up and take a picture. It's much slower than most other cameras that I've owned, especially other professional full frame cameras, and it actually reminds me a lot of the time that the Leica M262 takes to start up and take a picture. So I wonder if I can test this on picture. M262 on. It's actually quicker. The M262 is faster to start up, and that was one of the most annoying things about this camera, was that it was slow to start up. So I don't know if that is a common thing with Sony cameras. I don't know if they all start up slowly and people just leave them on standby or something like that. But yeah, did not expect that. Fucking sun. This came back out again. This is going to be all over the place. Moving on to the menu system. This is another thing that I don't really like about the camera, and this again could be a thing that I just need to get used to. I'm sure Sony cameras were notorious for having kind of crappy menu systems, but I think almost across the board, once you learn a menu system, you kind of know it and it becomes less of a problem. So compared to when I got the Canon and I spent an evening just floating through the menu system, changing some settings, getting the camera how I like it, and then never really changing anything after that. I did something similar with the Sony. I did not change very much because I didn't know what most of it meant. I still don't think it works exactly how I would want it to work. And that also may well be a function of just how the actual camera works and not so much where the things are in the menu system. This is hard to explain, it's convoluted. Bottom line is, menu system's not the best, but if you have the camera for a while, you'll get used to it, and once it's set, it's set. I feel like I've been focusing on a lot of negative things, but one of my favorite things about this camera is that it has one of the most reliable auto functions that I've used on almost any camera. Whether I've got it on the program mode or it's on manual, but with auto ISO, it exposes pretty much exactly how I would like it to expose, and the pictures always look good. It has a good metering system built into it. And this makes it easy, it makes post-production easy. Sometimes pictures don't even really need any post-production, they just come out looking good from the camera. And I always like that, the less time I can spend editing, the better. And the exposure compensation dial is easy to reach, and it's just on the top there. It's not too hard to move, it's not too easy to move, you don't bump it accidentally. It just works. That is definitely my favorite thing about this camera, because that makes it great for sort of everyday travel and street type stuff. So the Sony A7C is an extremely capable little camera with basically the same functions as the Sony A7R III, crammed into a more compact camera body. However, unless this camera speaks to you personally for what you want, I don't think this is a camera that I would recommend to most people. It seems like this camera is made for a much smaller niche than it's actually being marketed towards. And if you're in that niche, you will know most of the things that I've said are negatives about this camera will not bother you at all. And you know, if you do your research, you're gonna know. So if you are interested in renting one of these and trying it out, as well as this nice little Zeiss lens that goes with it, follow the link in the description. It'll take you to the Lens Rentals website. If you use the code Liam15, you'll get 15% off your order. It doesn't have to be this camera either, it can be any camera you're interested in. And they also have a rent to buy program. So if you are renting a camera and you decide that you love it and you want to keep it, you can also buy it. Lens Rentals are the largest and the best online camera rental service. I've been using them since before I was partnered with them, and I have no problem recommending them to you as well. So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop me a comment down below, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.